Hello, my name's Andrew Hotman. I'm the library director here at the Lead Public Library. I'm excited to have our program tonight. I'm a cyclist and I like to try to do any adventures that I can when they are available to me. A little backstory about this program actually is we were having a program with Kevin Mason, who does Notes on Iowa, and he was talking, I don't even remember what we had him here for, but I think the Dragoon, that trail in Iowa, and he was walking across Iowa following that trail. Someone, he had mentioned an encounter with someone who was actually on the Zoom meeting and said, hey, that was me. And that was Craig Saunders. Right. And he is a retired heart surgeon. He's an author. He was the oldest rider on the 2023 Tour de Africa. And he's going to recount with us his incredible journey today from Cairo to Cape Town at the age of 79. And that's the equivalent to 15 RAGBRAIS back to back. So I'm excited. I've got to peek at some of his photos and everything earlier today. So I'm excited to have him explain a little more of them to me. So let's welcome Craig.
Thank you, Andrew. You know, I was just telling him, I walked through the library here a little bit. This is the most beautiful library, the nicest library I've ever seen. You guys are so fortunate. You know, this whole thing started for me about 10 years ago. And I was coming home, coming back to Iowa for one of those functions, you know, where you mourn the passing of another person, but you really kind of look at your own life and say, what the hell have I been doing and what? And so when I was there, my nephew said to me, he says, why don't you ride RAGBRAIS with me next week? And I looked at him like he was absolutely crazy. I said, I haven't been on a bike since I was 12 years old. And I said, that's crazy. And I went to bed and woke up the next morning and said, you know what? Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should try that because my knees aren't what they used to be and I can't climb some of the mountains I used to and things like that. So maybe this should be my next thing. So I went and I had a guy fit me for a bike, you know, and they took my measurements and all that. In the process, he looked at me and he looked at the bike and he says, you know, he says, you're a Clydesdale, not a thoroughbred. And so that was kind of my introduction. And then, you know, if we can start the slides here.
Let me get that pulled up here.
Okay. So,
you should be good now.
Okay, good. I can go now.
Maybe.
There we go. There we go. So next July, I literally had tears in my eyes when I reached the Mississippi, you know? And I had taken along a bunch of my friends and kids, and we did 450 miles in one state. And then I did another RAGBRAIS, I guess, when at some point I found this kiosk that talked about this bike ride through Africa. And I was hooked from that point because ever since third grade, when Ricky Carson, my best friend, and I could roll Tanzania and Kilimanjaro off our tongues, we thought that was the greatest thing in the world. So I decided that I was going to do that. And this was this company, it's out of Canada, and they've been doing this tour through Africa for 20 years. It started January 15th and ended April 22nd. It was just a little under 6,000 miles, and there's an asterisk on that. We'll talk about that because they wouldn't let us ride through Ethiopia. They decided that was too dangerous, so we had to fly from Khartoum to Nairobi. But other than that, we went through about 11 countries. And I'm going to take you on that trip. I can't possibly tell you everything about that trip, but I'm going to touch with the highlights. I'm going to introduce you to some of the people that were on the trip and some of the people that we met along the way. And I will probably forget a lot of stuff, and if you've got questions, I'll try and answer. But we had 30 people that were on the trip, and there were about 20 males and 10 females on the trip. And the ages were from 18 to, well, me. They represented 10 or 12 countries, Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Great Britain, Canada, United States, of course, Brazil, Australia. I don't know the rest of them. Can't remember, but it was a good group. But before I got started, I wanted to check out the local territory a little bit. So I traded my bike for a camel, and I rode out to the outskirts of Cairo, and I found out that it was a whole lot like Manila, Iowa. You know, Cairo had pyramids just like we did here in Manila. Now, Cairo's was made of, 2,000-ton stones that were hauled down the Nile, and ours was made of corn kernels picked along the Nishnabotna, but nevertheless, we had some similarities. So that got me started a little bit. And, when people climb Mount Everest, they ask the gods for permission. And the night before we started our trip, we went to the light show at the pyramids, and we asked the pharaohs for permission to go through Egypt. And this is how our journey started. And let me just tell you what a day in the life on the tour would be like. So we'd wake up about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. And I can tell you, early in the trip, we'd wake up at 4:30. Later, it would be, you'd learn to sleep in the clothes that you were going to wear the next day. It's one of the things that had happened. But then through Egypt and Sudan, we'd always get the call to worship from the Muslims early in the morning. That'd wake us up. But we had to have our bags in the truck by 6 o'clock in the morning. Now, we were allowed 2 bags, and they couldn't be more than 50 pounds, 23 kilograms, and that was the absolute maximum. They wouldn't load it if it was any more than that. They had to be duffel bags with no firm wheels or siding or anything, so that they could be pushed and jammed into corners. And we had two big trucks like this. One was a dinner truck and one was a lunch truck. And we had our 2 bags. And one was our daily bag and one was our weekly bag. In our daily bag, we had our tents and everything and the clothes that we would need for the next 4 or 5 days until we had a rest day. And in the other bag was all the supplies, the tools that we might need, the extra spare parts and stuff that we didn't need on a daily basis. So we'd have breakfast at about 6:15, and once we were done with breakfast, we'd make snacks for the day at the table. A cycling jersey, I've heard some of you talking, some of you are cyclists, and so a cycling jersey has 3 pockets in the back. So I had this figured out, and everybody else did the same thing. My left pocket was my money, my billfold, my ID, my passport if we were going to cross a border or whatever. The right pocket was some energy gels and some electrolyte powder to put in the water, And the most important in the middle pocket, where it wouldn't get lost, was a plastic bag with the toilet paper in it. Now, as we made our snacks, a banana or 2 would go in the right pocket, and then maybe a peanut butter and jelly or a Nutella and peanut butter or whatever sandwich we put in that middle pocket. What I learned during my training for this was that every hour I would take in about 100 calories or just a little bit of nutrition, not a whole lot. It was better to be hungry than it was to be overstuffed and take in nutrition. But that's what I learned from the endurance people, is how to do this. And that became important, although sometimes you rush through and you eat on the run, drink on the run, and not stop and so forth. But anyway, we would begin at sunrise. We'd average about 90 miles a day. And along the way, there would be places we call coke stops where we knew we could stop and get some snacks or something and rest a little bit. Lunch would be on the road. The trucks would set up lunch for us about halfway, and that would be a big stop. If you wanted, if you felt that you couldn't ride the whole day, you could ride in the truck to lunch and then ride from lunch, or if you were having a problem, you could get on at lunch and ride to the end. But every day then we'd arrive and camp in the afternoon, and then they would have hot soup for us. And this was the biggest thing that pissed me off in the whole trip. You ride 100 miles a day in 100-degree heat, and they give you freaking hot soup to recover from. And what they were doing was just giving us leftovers from the night before. They were cheap. But you know, you need protein when you're doing this. And within the first hour after a big exercise like that, you need protein to build up your muscles and build new muscles and repair the old muscles. And you know, that got under my saddle pretty fast. But and then the other thing is they tried to tell you how good it was, and no matter how good it was, I didn't like it. So then we had to, you know, we get in, we pitch our tents, we get showers, and the showers would vary from none to a bucket of water and a sponge. And sometimes we had overhead showers that worked, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we had nice showers. There was all variability. And then at late in the afternoon, when everybody was in and before dinner, we'd have a writers meeting, and our tour guide would on a whiteboard give us what the layout of the next day, how many miles we were going to ride, how high, what the elevation was going to be, what the roads were going to be like, where lunch was going to be, you know, all the details that we need, what the weather was, whether it's going to be a headwind, tailwind, and all the particulars. So we'd have dinner, and then we'd go to bed, and get up 4:30 in the morning and do the same thing over again. And we do that for 4 or 5 days. It depended upon the terrain, depending on where we were, but we'd have a rest day every 6 or 7 days, and there were even a few extra rest days thrown in there. So coming out of Cairo, they actually bussed us out to the suburbs because there's 25 million people in Cairo and 50 million donkeys. And they didn't want us in that. So and the roads were really good in Egypt. They were straight, and when there was a curve, in the straight road, they had speed bumps just to wake you up and tell you that the road was turning. So speed bumps became a real story during this whole ride. And well, I'll get it over with now. They were different in every country, and some of them didn't have them so much. Others did. One country, honest to God, I counted 99 speed bumps in a row. And you know, you go to these speed bumps in a car with you go on a bike, and your phone would fly off and everything else. So you had to adjust these. But you know, 99 bottles of beer on the wall was one thing, but 99 speed bumps was getting to be too much. But anyway, so we headed out from Cairo to the Red Sea, and it was absolute desert along the way. There wasn't any green thing in sight except for maybe some trash bags that were blown in the side. Okay, I had hoped to pick up a stick because I was feeling pretty strong, and I had traveled halfway around the world, unpacked my bike, and I was riding, and I was going to pick up the staff, see if I could split the Red Sea. But I couldn't even find a stick in that desert. You know, we did get to the Red Sea, and I was surprised to find it was blue, but I took that in stride. And whoops, I'm sorry about that. I want to go back here. And here we are. This is the Sinai Peninsula over here on the side, and you can see the ships on the horizon waiting to go through the Suez Canal. So for about 3 or 4 days, we rode down alongside the Red Sea, and at one point, I was riding along and I saw this great big pelican. They must have been 5 feet tall. They were huge. And I went by and I said, "What the hell is that?" And so then I figured it out, and the fish shops use these pelicans. I don't know if they use them to fish, but they use them as their signs. These were the markings of a fish store. And so finally I said, I gotta stop and take some pictures of these pelicans. So I took these, and they weren't the best pelicans that were there, but the lesson is that, okay, this tour started out as a race 20 years ago. It's not a race anymore, okay? But it is. Yeah, just human nature, you know, you want to beat somebody ahead of you, or you want to be the first in line at dinner, or you gotta be, we were racing all day from one thing to another, you know, and what we needed to learn was to stop and smell the pelicans along the way. And that was about the hardest thing for me to do. There's so many pictures in my mind that I missed, but I guess that's what I get for being there, you know, and that's my reward. So, Andrew, here we go. So after 4 or 5 days, we had our meeting, and they said, okay, now we're gonna cross these mountains, and we're gonna leave the Red Sea. We're gonna go over the mountains, and we're going to go back to the Nile and go down the Nile. And I was kind of leery looking at those mountains, but as it turned out, it really wasn't anything. It was only about a 3,000 foot climb, and it was very enjoyable, and it led to absolutely was the best day ever on a bike for me. Now, I do not consider myself a cyclist at all. As one of the other riders says, I'm not a cyclist. I'm just a guy who likes adventure and knows how to ride a bike. Some of the guys, you know, their bike was their church. For me, mine was kind of my gym, and was the thing that got me to the next adventure. And going down the other side of those mountains was the best day I ever had. We were going downhill. We had a tailwind, with just absolutely flying. And I was convinced I was flying through Mars. The sand was kind of salmon pink, and there were rocks, and I fantasized the whole time. I think that says caution, aliens crossing there or something. I don't know. But I stopped my bike, and I got off and walked through the desert there, and just fantasized that that's what it would look like if I was standing on Mars. And it wasn't. I had to get back on the bike, and so the next day, you know, we started at sunrise in the desert, and we ended at sunset over the Nile. And of course, the addition of water just turned everything from bare sand into lush vegetation, and it was kind of magical, actually, getting there. So we stopped in Luxor, and I have this picture here of a friend of mine. His name was Nick, and he was from Australia, and he was given the credit for coining the motto of our trip here of bloody hell. Whoops, hit the wrong button again. Bloody hell was his motto, and we all adopted that. Everything was bloody hell from there on. But the big discussion that night when we arrived in Luxor, and this was our first rest night, well, how you feeling? How you doing? Did you hurt? No, everybody felt good, but you know what everybody complained about was chapped lips. Everybody was complaining about chapped lips. Well, Nick, this is a picture actually that was taken at the end of the ride, but he had developed a pretty good beard, and when you take the helmet off, he had this gray hair and square chin, and I thought he was really developing a Hemingway look, you know. I thought he was looking good. We had dinner one night, and we went out for a little walk around Luxor, and he decided he was gonna go into a pharmacy and get some lip balm. And, he went in and he did his best Arabic and came out and he took this stuff and put it on his lips, and it was lipstick. And I don't know why I didn't get a picture of that. But it did give me an opportunity to tell everybody how we treated chapped lips here in Iowa. You know, I mean, I don't know if your mother did it, but when I was a kid, our mother, if we had chapped lips, would put chicken poop on our lips.
Oh, no.
We didn't call it chicken poop, but so the people there with us, they said, I mean, I was the only farmer there, okay? So they said, really, does it work? I said, no, of course not, but it keeps you from licking your lips. All right. So Luxor, we spent a little time in Luxor, and there was the Karnak temple and the Luxor temple. And they had the sphinxes that were aligned so that summer solstice, so the sun would shine right down the alley. I mean, these weren't just erected willy-nilly. I mean, they knew what they were doing. They were astrologers and architects and so forth. And on the east side of the river was all the temples, and on the west side of the river was the Valley of the Kings, and the tombs. Now, the Valley of the Kings is much younger than the pyramids. I think that there's a good 1,000 years or so. I think they ran out of money and stopped building pyramids and then went to the Valley of the Kings, which were something like, I don't know, 600-700 years or so before Christ. I'm not sure about that, but I often wondered if they chose this place because it kind of looked like a pyramid. And anyway, so over here, right, it was King Tut's tomb. It was just a little hole in the ground, but King Tut's got the last laugh because they're building a museum now on the outside of Cairo called the Gem, the Great Egyptian Museum, which is all about King Tut and so forth. So he's got his due. Of course, you could go into the oh, that's your thing over there.
Hit the circle button in the middle, hit the little circle button, and it'll stop jumping around.
You could go in the tombs, and that's just another whole presentation itself, but I did include this one picture over here. This was our photographer, and I put that in there just as a reminder of how ancient and old these things were, because Cleopatra was born closer to the invention of the iPhone than she was to the building of the pyramids. On the other side of the Valley of the Kings was Queen Pharaoh Hatshepsut's temple. And this was spectacular, and she was one of the 12 pharaohs, female pharaohs that Egypt had. And Egypt actually, women were at a high status there. It wasn't any of this modern religion where women aren't appreciated and so forth. In Egypt, apparently, it very much was. The temple had been destroyed, but that was because her brother didn't like her and wanted to wipe her out. It was simply rivalry, not anything else. And this was also, unfortunately, the site of a big terrorist attack back in, I think it was 96 or so, when about 90 some tourists were killed here at the temple. But when we left Luxor, we were, you know, in a tremendous amount of greenery and luxury and people that weren't around out in the desert. And I just wish that I could, you know, transmit that to everybody that was following me on that trip. You know, I remember in the early morning sunlight, the fishermen out on the river and the people sitting by, and I looked at this bank here. These people were waving to us as we went by, and I was looking at the sediment here. This is right along the Nile. And I said to myself, you know, somewhere in there is a sediment from when Moses was floated down the Nile. And it's right there. So we went on and we went down and we went to Aswan, which is where during the Cold War, the Russians built this big dam across the Nile River and flooded everything beyond that. But Aswan was one of the capitals, and this is one of the greatest things that I saw there. 3,500 years ago, that Pharaoh, Queen Pharaoh, Chipatsu, that had that temple, commissioned this obelisk to be built. Now imagine hunter-gatherers, Stone Age people, you know, flicking off plates of stone to make knives, and then making arrowheads, and then making spears and stuff. And imagine that technology advancing to where out of solid rock they could carve an obelisk that was over 1,000 tons, 140 feet tall. Not only move it down the mountain, put it in a boat, move it down to Giza and erect it as a temple. I mean, this one they didn't because it broke and they left it there. I saw it 23 years ago. I actually was in Egypt at the turn of the millennium. I wanted to see what happened. And so I had seen that 23 years ago, and I was kind of surprised they didn't have it finished by now. But this was a real testament to their technology and to their ability, and actually to the human race. But makes you think maybe we can solve other problems too. But we went on to Abu Simbel, which is down along it's kind of the end of Egypt, is before you get into Sudan. And this was the first century day. A century day in cycling is when you ride 100 miles a day, okay? Now it's the first day that we did 100 miles, and I was feeling good that day. And I said, well, let's see what happens. And I got on my bike and I just didn't stop. Well, I didn't stop much. And I left early in the morning, and I was the second one to finish that day. And the guy where we at our lodge here where we camped out came up to me and shook my hand and said, "How old are you?" You know, and so that kind of gave me some street creds right there. And especially with this group, this was the cool kids club. These are the guys that expected to finish first every day and were disappointed if they didn't. And but they were good guys. This was John from Scotland. He was the youngest. He was 19 years old, and his grandfather had gone from Cairo to Cape Town years and years ago and written a book about it. And John was trying to read the book as he was going through. Joe from Long Island in New York was kind of the head of the group, and he was a young. Actually, he had sold the newspaper. He had some local newspapers there in Long Island. He sold those, and he was out on tour. Boss was from the Netherlands. Jasper was from the Netherlands. Boss was in his 30s. Coco was Spanish, and he went to Marquette University here in the States on a soccer scholarship, and was actually had a stint as professional soccer. And then later I learned that he also had 2 artificial hips. And then Alex here was from Colorado, and he was the fastest one of the group. He weighed about 140 pounds, and he was always the first one to finish. And they would ride together and take advantage of everything. And they actually expected to finish first. So that day, they came up to me and they said, "Guys, who are you? You know, what sports did you play when you were young?" and all that kind of stuff. And they were saying, they're saying, "Man, you're such an inspiration." Well, let me give you a little spoiler alert, okay? About halfway through, I started getting a little pain in about 3,000 miles, I started getting a little pain in my hip. By the time we got to Cape Town, these same guys were coming up to me and saying, "God, I'm sure glad I'm not you." It's a change. a little bit there, but, anyway. So that night in Abu Simbel, we, when you have a rest day, you're on your own. They don't, the tour group doesn't feed you, you gotta go out. And we went out, had street food that night. I keep hitting the wrong button and I apologize for that. So, Nick here, the guy with the chapstick, Kathy. Okay, thank you. Kathy was from England. She had a career in the military and then kind of in the government. I don't know if she was a spy or what she was, but boy, she knew everything and she was actually fun to be with. This was Alex from, she was a prosecuting attorney from Regina, Canada, and she was one tough lady. She came in one night in the rain, was shivering cold, and she was riding with another lady who had hypothermia, who couldn't even hold her food or anything. But I looked at Alex that night and I said, look, if I'm having problems, if I think I'm getting through, I'm gonna follow, I'm gonna stick with Alex. She's gonna make it, she's tough. And this was Julie. Julie was from the Yukon. She was, I don't know, late 40s, early 50s, maybe, I don't know. And she was kind of worked for the Canadian government up there. And I met her the first day. She was kind of sitting there and not talking to anybody. And I wasn't talking to anybody. So I sat down and I talked with her. You know, we became, I think she was my best friend on the whole trip at the end of that. So in Abu Simbel was where they moved the Temple of Ramses up out of where the Lake Nasser was going to flood it, and moved it up and made a new temple out of the old temple. So we spent the day there looking around, and then the next day we boarded a ferry. And over here you can see this is where that temple was. This is what they built to bring the temple up out of under the water and have it available for people. So we all boarded the ferry and we crossed Lake Nasser into just a little bit of Egypt and then into Sudan. The border crossing from Egypt to Sudan took us 3.5, 4 hours. It was the most bureaucratic thing I've ever seen. Trucks were lined up for days, sometimes for weeks along the roads. It was terrible across that border, but we made it. And the roads in Sudan were something else. They didn't have rumble strips, but they had the ability to make their own rumble strips on the road with potholes and everything else. The traffic was massive. There would be caravans of these buses and of cattle trucks, bringing cattle from the Sudan up to Egypt to be processed. And the road was littered here with dead cattle along the road the whole way. And what we found out was that these trucks bringing the cattle up, they were taxed when they got to the border. And whether your cattle were alive or dead, they were taxed on these. So they would just throw the dead cattle out of the truck alongside the road, and we just keep going down. The first little village we came to was in Sudan, was actually a mining village, and we were warned about Sudan. Oh, you got to be careful, don't take pictures and all this kind of stuff. But it really wasn't that way. The people were really very nice. And we had talked to one cop along the way who said that the chatter all the time was, here come these bikers, be good to them, don't let them get in trouble and so forth. But the first little village we came to was like this these shacks along the road, and the first thing you noticed was the smell. And God, it was awful. The garbage along the road and so forth. And then there was a little stream and some tents, and then over on the other side were the shacks and so forth. And and the other thing that they had was all this wood that was stacked up around. And that was kind of strange because there wasn't any vegetation around or anything. So I I named the place Deadwood, you know, and I wondered if it was like Deadwood in the Dakotas with the old mining camp, but there were no women there, so Calamity Jane would not have fit in this Deadwood, nor would she have had any liquor to drink. But I met this guy, Allie, out on the outskirts, and he was a prospector. He lived up in the hills in some of these shacks, and the bulldozers would come and they would mine these things, and the prospectors would go out. They were dumb, you know, they traded their pans, their gold pans. Since there wasn't any water, they changed it, they traded them for metal detectors. And he showed me that he had a little medicine bottle and he had a little kernel of gold there in his medicine bottle and so forth. We had a nice little visit about gold prospecting in the Sudan. Then we camped out in the desert, and I mean, there was nothing around here. This was really the first time that we were just out with absolutely nothing. And at night, it was a little bit hard to find your tent in the moonlight, but it made for some spectacular scenes. And in the morning, our photographer was out doing his Lion King in front for us. And so now, what I discovered about the desert, okay, and some of you might not want to hear about this, okay, but I discovered the unexpected pleasure of taking a crap in the desert, okay? So you wake up at 4:30 in the morning and it's cold, and that was a surprising thing, how cold it was. And you know, you're not ready for that, and you're hustling around, you get your bags packed, and you have breakfast and so forth. And now you're thinking, well, maybe I should go, but everybody else, now the sun's coming up, everybody else is taking off on their bikes, and the last thing you want to do is be going out with a shovel behind the sand dune, you know? So I get on my bike and I get on and I ride out and I get to the road and I turn, and we've all got downloaded the route on GPS on an app on the phone that's called Ride with GPS. And so I make a right turn, and the first thing I hear is my GPS saying, in 41 miles, make a left turn. And I'm thinking, oh man, this is gonna be a long day, you know? So about an hour into it, it's time for some breakfast. And you know, stop for my hourly nutrition. So I stop and have a little bit, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I should find a rock or something here, but there's really nothing around. And so I get on and I keep riding, and pretty soon, you know, it's pretty obvious that you're gonna have to find a place somewhere. So you start looking for a rock or a bush or something, and you know, that's not good, this isn't good. Then you adapt the policy that good is better than best, or whatever that saying is, and you'll take anything, okay? And it's not that I'm modest at all, I could care less, but in respect to my fellow riders, nobody wants to see an old man with his pants down around his ankles, you know? So you find a little bush, you find a tree, and you get there just in time. And oh my God, the relief is just amazing. You know, you feel so good. And so you get on your bike, and GPS is saying in another 50 miles, turn right. So I'm sorry for taking you on that journey, but you know, I mean, the good thing is we always had 4 bathrooms with us wherever we went. So in Sudan were the Nubian pyramids. They were much younger than the Egyptian pyramids, but they were kind of interesting. They were much smaller, and actually another one of the differences is that they're actually tombstones, because the pharaohs or whoever it is in the building are buried underneath them, as opposed to in them in Egypt. And when we went in some of the temples here, we were the only ones there. And they unlocked the door for you. And it wasn't all shiny and nice, and you actually felt like, oh my God, I've discovered this, you know, I'm the first one to come in here, and it was nice in that respect. So shifting gears here just a little bit, this is Suleiman, and he's a 80-year-old Sudan farmer. And this is his first wife, the first wife of 3. And we went to his house one night when we were camped in the desert. We were invited, and we went in, and it was very simple. This room that we're in, an oblong room. What we were sitting on were actually 4 single beds along the wall that were used for couches or something during the day. And on the only furniture was this cabinet with dishes in it on one end, and from up here where we're looking was a big TV screen set on. And he was a farmer, and he told us about his farm and what he was doing. And he pays no taxes. He has no government subsidy. The only thing he gets from the government are roads, some electricity, and not even water pumps. Okay. The interpreter asked him, you know, how many camels he had, how many children he had, and he wouldn't answer, or he wouldn't give you a right answer. He said, well, I've got 7 children, and I've got, you know, it's okay. And so afterwards they told him, he does that because he doesn't want to brag, and he's afraid of the evil eye. If he brags, the evil eye is going to get him and punish him for that. Well, here we were talking, and this is his first wife, his senior wife. He's got supposedly 2 others. I don't know if the evil eye has 4 or not. On here, 50-year-old lady from the Netherlands was one of our strong writers. Actually, they were all strong writers. There was nobody that wasn't. And I took out my phone and I was showing Suleiman, my brother, combining soybeans, and I was showing him cattle out in green fields and so forth. He was absolutely amazed at all of it. He was asking questions like, what do you use for irrigation? And he was surprised that we didn't use irrigation, that we just depend upon rain and all of that. And so getting back to the children, we're not sure how many children he had, but this is how many were around that night. And this was his youngest little boy. Now, mind you, he's somewhere around 80 years old. The boys would go to school, but they would only go to school until they were 12, 13 years old. And then they would work herding the goats or the camels or whatever. And the girls would not go to school. The girls would be married off as soon as 12 years of age. And even more disturbingly, the interpreter told us afterwards that they would undergo female circumcision, or more normally what's called female genital mutilation, so that they made good husbands or good wives for their husbands. That was pretty hard to take, you know, to listen to that and to see these beautiful young faces and so forth. And I read a book before written by a Maasai girl. Her name is Niece and the Tree or something like that. It was The Girls in the Fig Tree. And she's a Maasai woman that actually went against this, and she's now speaking for the UN and going against all of this stuff and making an impact. So I just bring this up because that's something we should be aware of, and that's something that we need to make sure. We need to educate women, and we need to utilize the 50% of the population that's got better brains than most men, you know? So we rode on to through Sudan to Khartoum. Now, Khartoum is the capital of Sudan, and it's where the Blue Nile and the White Nile from Lake Victoria merge into the Nile proper. And Khartoum is the Arabic name for elephant trunk, supposedly. So the Nile is the elephant trunk that hangs down to the Mediterranean. Now, when we were there, it was relatively peaceful. There were protests that were going on. We could smell the tear gas. We stayed in a kind of a British colonial hotel right next to government buildings. Behind us was this brand new modern hotel, one of two modern buildings. And a few months later, this is a scene of the bombing in the petroleum building, the other new building in Sudan as the war broke out. So we flew out of Khartoum and flew over Ethiopia and came into Nairobi. And there we had to camp and wait for the trucks to meet up with us. And one of the fun things we did there was visit the elephant orphanage. They have up to 36 elephants there, and they don't refuse any of them. They have them there for about 5 years before they can introduce them back into the wild. And it's cute, as nice as this is, not all people in Africa like this because they think there's too many elephants and they cause too much problem. I didn't go to the game camps there. I stayed and I rested and I did some of my writing and so forth in Nairobi. But when we left Nairobi, it was completely different, okay? There was no more desert, it was lush, and there were more people alongside the roads than there are in the streets of New York. And it was colorful and it was beautiful, and we began to see animals, and donkeys were, gee, I thought I saw donkeys, but they were zebras, you know? And this was the first free-range giraffe that I saw at the acacia tree. Couldn't get any closer because the acacias had these great big long needles on them, like go through your tires like mad. But so things changed, and we could take pictures of some of the women. I enjoyed meeting some of them. Some of them. There were pictures of driving down Nairobi of two Maasai women sitting on a gray rock with their red tunics and their teeth shining, their bald head, the sun hitting them. On the opposite side was this lady who was walking with her baby strapped, and she was in a blue gown and the wind was catching it, and she was just like an umbrella over her head. A little bit farther down were boys in the trees watching us and yelling at us. And you know, I wasn't smelling the pelicans there. I didn't stop and take pictures. I was afraid they didn't want me to or whatever. But the pictures I have in my brain of that are better than the ones that I would have gotten on my camera. And I hate to tell you that's the advantage I get of going pedaling and going on the trip. Then a little ways out of Nairobi, we stopped for lunch in the desert. And one of the things about this area was that the cows were alive. There weren't any more dead cows alongside of the road. But there's something here that you're not seeing. And something that I didn't see. And if you look really closely right here, that's the snows of Kilimanjaro up in the clouds. A little bit better picture that shows the mountain. So the next week or so was just dominated by this mountain. Now, 15 years ago, I had climbed that mountain with my 16-year-old daughter, Stevie, and I knew that there were people up there looking down while I was down there now on the bottom looking up. It was really kind of a surreal experience. As we passed into Tanzania, just after that period, we came into the rain shadow of Kilimanjaro, and everything started turning lush. This is the border crossing, and as soon as we got across, you know, there were cornfields and there was a mountain, and more cornfields and pioneering DeKalb. And I'll tell you, except for the mountain, except for the people, except for the buildings, except for the architecture, and except for the fact that this was January or February and not the fall, this could have been Iowa. So that night, we camped in a cow pasture before we went into Arusha. And it was kind of a somber night because one of our riders from Brazil came down the road too fast that day and lost control coming down a hill and went into a cement ditch alongside the road. And the other experienced riders with him thought that he was dead. And fortunately, his helmet protected him. And a few days later, he was doing well enough to go back home to Brazil. Had lots of facial fractures and broken ribs and so forth, but he clearly wasn't dead. We had 3 people not complete the trip. Vlad was one of them. Another one was Eric from the Yukon, who got a little bit spooked when a car was passing and went off the side of the road, broke his collarbone, and he had to go back. And then another lady was actually from Whistler, British Columbia, Canada, developed GI symptoms that just couldn't seem to be controlled, and so she went back. We all had some GI symptoms, some worse than others, but that interrupted her trip. But so there we were in Arusha, and right next to us was Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro was named from the Africa words that meant white mountain. And about 25 million years ago, the crust there in Egypt started thinning, and maybe just by 1 or 2 millimeters a year. But after 20 million years, some volcanoes bubbled up, and there were 8 of them actually. And of those 8, Kilimanjaro was the largest, and it remains the largest freestanding mountain in the world. 200 miles to the south, it had a twin. Was just as large, just as big, but it never had a name. Nobody ever, because it exploded and left Ngora crater, which is a 102-mile cauldron in the floor, and so this I hadn't seen before, and this I had to go see. Spectacular view, and the place is basically an Eden. The only thing that it doesn't have are giraffes, because there's no trees in the cauldron. So we spent one of the days going through that. And then in this part of Africa, someone has once said, you're either riding into or riding out of the Rift Valley. Well, now we were riding out of the Rift Valley, and this day we had 6,000 feet of climb to get out of the valley. And I stopped my first hour for a little nutrition, and these baboons came up, and this was obviously the alpha male. And man, he came up right from me, and I thought I was in trouble. But it turned out he was pretty respectable, and he was happy with my banana peel while I ate the banana. And then after completing it, Philip, a friend of mine, who is a lawyer from the United States but living in Germany, he took this picture of me and posted it on the internet about how this old guy, climbed the mountain when other people were having problems. But we should have learned our lesson about the evil eye, okay? Shouldn't brag about that, because the evil eye certainly did get me. I was riding into town. We were going into a place called Maivia. And, I came, we were wet and, my phone wasn't working because it had gotten wet and all my clothes were wet and I was tired. And 200 meters from the camp, little intersection, the truck kind of cut me off. And I didn't fall, I just kind of like tipped over, okay? But I was tired, I guess. And then I got a little road rash on my leg where I'd had it before. And so I had bent the derailleur on my bike, so I couldn't ride. So I limped into camp there in the rain. And that started a cascade of things. I took my helmet, my gloves, my sunglasses off. I set them down on the table and promptly forgot them. As I took my bike to get fixed, then I went for a room and so forth. And so I lost my helmet, my sunglasses, and they won't let you ride without a helmet. You know, you can't ride around camp without a helmet, but luckily they had an old one in the truck that somebody had given them, and it was pretty much broken on the inside, but it passed the test of wearing a helmet, okay? So we started off then the next day or after that rest day, and basically it was like 2.5, 3 RAGBRAIS through Malawi and Zambia, and our goal was to get to Victoria Falls. And I think I'm rambling here, it's getting kind of long. I'll try and speed up a little bit, but again, there's just so much color and people alongside the roads and the markets and the vegetables and the kids. We spent 2 days riding through with kids constantly yelling, "How are you? How are you?" And it was cute at first, and it got so annoying. I never thought that. I never thought I'd be a kid beater, you know, when I began to think that by the end. And what they wanted though was just, they didn't care how I was. They wanted recognition. And if you didn't wave to them, if you didn't acknowledge them, then, "How are you?" You know? But, you know, that was annoying, but it was cute. And there were all sorts of faces alongside the road. And then we had some of our own faces in the group too. And this was David. He was from the UK. And he reminded me of Yoda. Okay? Now, David wore the Star of David around his neck. And his special skill, he could find a beer in any Muslim country in the world. And one day we had camped and I went out looking, I was wanting a bottle of water, and I was walking down the road and I heard him calling from the other side, you know, "Come over here, come over here." And I went over and he was sitting there all by himself with a bunch of Africans around him. And he had like about 6 empty beer bottles. But he had this kind of Zen quality about him. He used to sit on by the side, and I thought he was meditating. I found out he was vaping. And so I got talking to him, and he was telling me a story. He says, "Yeah," he says, "I had this company, we did vending machines, and then we got into delivery, and I sold it." And he says, "And now," he says, "I have no purpose. I have no purpose." So he's on this ride through Africa. But he was a hell of a guy, and damn, I couldn't figure it out. All the women loved it. Oh, and then the kind of the opposite was Mary here. And Mary was again a strong rider. And she was the fashionista. I mean, boy, she was dressed. She had she never wore the same thing twice. She was all fancy. And her special skill, her secret skill, she could find a spa anywhere in the desert. And she could also find transportation and guys to help her out. She was interesting. She owns a bagel shop in Washington DC, and her husband's, her father-in-law wrote, as some of you guys remember the movie Days of Wine and Roses? Her father-in-law wrote that. And her husband now is trying to reproduce that. So he's a very successful businessman and so forth. But she was fun to be with, on the road too. So then we were passing through Malawi, and parts of Malawi, you know, they had rice fields. It looked like Southeast Asia to me, and it was wet, and Lake Malawi is back there. And the other thing Malawi is known for is that's where Madonna got her children. Before that, that's where the Arabs got their slaves, out of Malawi. And was writing with a guy that had actually grown up in, his father was in the British diplomatic corps, and he grew up in Malawi and in South Africa. And he pointed this out to me. He said, "This is a very rare scene. This is water in a dry lake bed in Malawi." So I had to have a picture of that. When we pulled into camp, we were the entertainment for the whole community, and they put ropes so that you know, this just happened to be in a school. And if you let the kids just run through the camp and through all your stuff and so forth, it was chaos. But it was kind of like the circus was coming to town when we would get there. People would come out, and honest to God, they'd just sit there and watch us. They'd watch us eat. They'd watch us put the tent up. They didn't have TV. We were their TV. So we made it to Victoria Falls. This is Berg. He's a German, and interestingly enough, he worked for Johnson & Johnson out of New Jersey, and was just about 30 minutes down the road from me, where I worked in New Jersey for a long time. And then God, I got a block on her name right now. Probably because she reminds me a whole lot of my ex-wife. And he was an attention seeker, but we made it to Victoria Falls, which was one of the highlights. And you could see Victoria Falls from the distance because it made its own weather. And this was the mist from the falls coming up with the clouds and so forth. And the local name is Smoke That Thunders, Mosai Altaniana, and the boiling water. This is just a small picture of the falls, and I wish I had a movie for you, but I don't. The falls is twice the height of Niagara and almost a mile and a half long. So this picture is a diagram of the falls. And so that slide that I showed you before, I put in a corner right down here. You see that? Remember the last slide? That's just this part of the falls right here. There's still this whole remaining falls over here. Here's the iconic bridge that was built across the falls and the site from the bridge. But really, the only way to see the whole thing is you strap your butt onto a lawnmower with the propeller, and then it's underneath a hang glider, and you fly over it. Now, they wouldn't let you take your cameras or your iPhones because you may drop them. So they sold me a $60 video from a GoPro that they taped to the wing. And I looked at that once, and then I lost it in the internet myself. So I can't show you that video, but I can tell you it was exciting to see the whole falls in one place. You can see the mist. You fly through the mist and out of the mist and through rainbows that are created, and it was exciting. You could also walk to the edge of but it was like walking through a car wash. It was something. We spent 3 days in Victoria Falls, and everything. I mean, the falls was spectacular, everything. I really enjoyed sunset cocktails on the Zambezi River, you know. And there I made one of the best deals of my life, I think. there was a guy, a urologist from Tacoma, Washington. He was about my age. Now he was like, nobody was my age there. He was younger, but I made a deal with him. He was going home from there. He was just what we call a segment rider. He wasn't doing the whole ride. He was going home. So for a bottle of wine and a taxi fare to the airport, I bought his helmet from him. So a nice helmet. And so then, after leaving Victoria Falls, we started well, it really wasn't the second half. We'd already gone halfway, but we went from East Africa into South Africa. And there's a point here, it's the only place on the globe, the quadrupoint, where four corners, where four countries come together. And it's a little cheating. It's not like the four corners in the States where you can stand and put your feet, because number one, it's in the middle of the water, and number two, they don't exactly come together, but basically that's it. And it's four countries: Zambia, Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe. And they built this new bridge going across it. And when I entered the bridge, I missed the pedestrian way here on the side, and I got in the main traffic. It was one way, and there was a big truck behind me. And he wasn't pushing me. He was being polite, but I felt the need to, really go and not hold him up for the rest of the traffic. And when we got to the end of the road, there was a little break in this, or the end of the bridge, there was a little break in this, and I decided that I was going to just zoom over there and get out of his way and get on to the border crossing. Well, let's just say gravity sure makes an awful strong case for something that's just a theory, okay? Because I caught my front tire in an embedded railroad track that was there, that I had no idea that was there. Now, every bike rider knows that you go across railroad tracks at right angles, you don't parallel or whatever, but I didn't see this. My wheel went right in, and I slid into Botswana head first, a 3-point landing, my shoulder, my hip, and my head. And it was in slow motion with the head, and I could feel that helmet that I bought absorb the pressure. And it worked so good and so fantastic that the only thing that really happened to me, except the little strawberry on my shoulder and my hip, is that I was just really pissed, because you don't want to be the oldest guy in the trip and then be the one that falls all the time, But that helmet came off and or did its job, and I was very happy. Now, I'll buy drinks for anybody that knows what this is. Good, I don't have to buy drinks. What do you think it would like if a bull elephant was walking across the road and was taking a piss? Yeah, never guessed that, huh? Well, inquiring minds want to know, and now you know. So we entered, as we went into Botswana, what they call the Elephant Highway, and it's in the edge of the Kalahari Desert, and not all 110,000 elephants in Botswana commute on the highway every day, but there's a lot of them, and they've been there for 20,000 years alongside the Sands people who are in the desert. They're hunter-gatherers, Stone Age people. They get their water from gourds and from roots and so forth. So we started down the roads in Botswana, and I was really disappointed at first we didn't see any elephants, but that didn't last too long. So you look at the elephant there, you saw that biker go by, you look at him and say, what the hell's going on? And then he decides, he doesn't want any of that. We were warned a whole lot not to perturb the elephants and so forth. But so we would go down, and it was just like deer crossing, except it was elephants. And at first I didn't think we were going to see many, but we'd see a lot of droppings of the elephants. And I'll tell you, those elephant droppings, That was some, you know, some of them were fresh, some of them were old, some of them were piled high, some of them were squashed down flat. But wherever they were impressive. That night, or one night, at least, there was a entrepreneuring, host who, in this part of the country, the water was all kind of brackish, and he would bring fresh water in for the elephants, and the elephants would actually come right up to almost where we were eating and see it. And then we cross into Nambia, and Nambia was just colorful and
Oh.
we had the worst roads in Nambia. In fact, we had to change the tires on the bikes, put wider tires on to get some of the roads. But we went to the sand dunes, the largest sand dunes in the world, and went out into the dunes for sunrise and just took some marvelous pictures, saw some more marvelous sights. And then there's this one area that's very famous. It's basically Dead Valley, and 1,000 years ago things dried up in this lake, and it just left this dried lake bed or river bed, and these trees that are they're 1,000 years old. They're there, they petrified. It's so dry they're not dissolving. They're not falling apart. And it's bleak and it's spectacular. I immediately called my brother back in Manila, and I said, "Hey, Doug," I said, "you know, our pond's drying up. Don't worry, in 1,000 years, we're gonna have a tourist attraction." So the road was long. It was interesting. We finally reached the Orange River, Namibia on one side, South Africa on the other side. We were tired. I decided that, you know, the night before, they gave us our t-shirts, the jerseys for the tour before we went into Cape Town. And I decided I'd take a selfie and show you what I saw every night for 3 months, you know. That was my view of the inside of my tent. And then, as we went down South Africa for the first time, you can see here Table Mountain on the horizon. We're about 60 miles away, and this is the iconic mountain which Cape Town is built around the bottom of Table Mountain. So we knew we were getting close, and the amazing thing is, back there somewhere, somebody said, "God, you realize we're only like 900 kilometers from Cape Town?" Like about 560 miles, which is like a whole RAGBRAIS. We're only 900 kilometers. Everybody was sad. It's going to be over. I mean, we were happy, but we were sad. And it was shocking that we had that little of amount to go. But about 40 miles out, we stopped for pictures. We all had our jerseys on, and we were posing. We were getting ready to go into Cape Town. Now, in the background, it was, of course, you see, we were getting into fall and winter there in South Africa. It's spring here, but fall and winter there. And Table Mountain is supposed to be right over my head here, but we couldn't see it. But we stopped for pictures anyway in the staging area. Now, before when we ride, we would just plain ride. Some people would ride in groups, some people would ride solos, some days you'd ride with one person. There was no organization to it at all. But here, to get into Cape Town and so forth, they organized us into groups, into 3 groups. And we had to stick together. We couldn't ride on our own. They wanted us, you know, to get through the town safely and guided and so forth. So 1, 2, 3 groups of 10 to 12 people, whatever it was. But before we did that, we stopped for the pictures, and honest to God, I could not lift my bicycle over my head for the real picture, you know, that you're supposed to make. So I did it with it standing up, and everybody posed for pictures. This is Greg. I think he's from Milwaukee, and he joined us about halfway. Kathy, we met earlier in Egypt. She's from England, and this was her college roommate, Karen, who was from Britain but lives in Australia now. And she was actually the one that gave me the repair kit when my tent broke in the African sun, and my tape melted, and I was just at a loss. She had just joined the group and had a repair kit and gave it to me, and she became my new best friend. And then this was John, and this was the 19-year-old, and whose grandfather had traveled the same route, wrote the book and so forth. And I thought, you know, when I first met John, that he was maybe a privileged kid because he got to this school that did a lot of traveling and all that kind of stuff. But it turns out he wasn't at all. His grandfather wrote the book as a teacher. His parents were teachers. He lived in Loch Ness and played bagpipes for tourists to raise money for this trip. And did not have a beard when he started the trip. So we made our way then into Cape Town. Now, I started in the second group. The Cool Kids Club were, of course, in the first group. But something happened. Somebody had some mechanical problems with their bike, so they had to stop, get that fixed. So my second group passed them. We beat them into Cape Town. Okay. And I knew that my son was going to join me there. My son lives in Munich, and he was going to come down and meet me. And what I didn't know is that my daughter and her husband from Sacramento were flying out also to meet me. And I had no idea that they were there or were coming. So I rode into town, came along, and came back to see my son and say hi. And I said to myself, who are those people beside him, and why are they so happy to see me? You know, I didn't even recognize them at first. So here we are. Here's the first group riding into Cape Town.
Yeah, Craig!
So 3.5 months, about 6,000 miles, 100 days of riding.
Hey!
And I see my son.
Who did the ring with you?
How was the ride? Oh my god!
I was fine, and they were taking pictures, so I didn't know what to do. So we made it. Yeah, completed the trip, and you know, truth be told, they brought me a bunch of Krispy Kreme donuts. I didn't want to show that picture. But I'll show you the picture of the wine and the champagne toast, because that meant something to me too. When I was working in California at the beginning of my career, I had a friend by the name of John Garner, who I worked with a lot, and we kind of developed this little hobby and kind of a multimedia company. Before the days of digital and so forth. John had exceptional talents. He didn't know that you couldn't do things, you know. And so we developed this little hobby, and through that we got to know Robert Mondavi. And he said to me once, he says, making a fine wine is just a lot of simple steps, intricately put together and aged to perception. And I've thought about that ever since then. And whether you're doing heart surgery or whatever task you have, you just do one little job right, and then you do the next job, you put it together, and by the time you're done, you know, you've got something. So whether you're riding across Africa or whatever you're doing, you just take those little steps, put them together, take your time, and you can do anything that you want to do. Thank you so much for putting.
What's the next adventure?
Oh, yeah, well, so usually people ask me, would you do it again? And absolutely 100% yes, I would. But I would do it 10 years earlier, 20 years. I would, I'm not going next year. Okay. I would do it earlier. I would do these, but my next adventure, it might be a little bit different. I've been doing some reading and met some people that have had some experiences and so forth. And I've always thought that kind of when you're dead and that's it, boom. I've been kind of agnostic. You know, I grew up in the church, Presbyterian church, really strong. You know, I've been a lot of my adult life pretty agnostic. But my next adventure is to explore spiritualism and to see what meaning there is in life here, because there's a lot of stuff that can't be explained. And scientists say that religion isn't true, that, you know, that you can't prove it. Well, you can't not prove it either. And I don't want to get into that. Anyway, thank you so much for your attention and your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting.
So what did you ride for a bicycle?
So it was kind of a hybrid, a touring bike, and the brand name was Kona, made out in Seattle. And the model was Sutra, so it was a Kona Sutra.
I think I seen a Brooks saddle on it.
Yeah. And it was a good bike. It didn't cause me any problems. I had to adjust the gears a little bit. But if I were gonna do it again, I would definitely pick one that had some suspension in it. Because there was no suspension, you know, like a mountain bike.
So did you ride tubeless?
No. They recommended that you not ride tubeless. But that was an old recommendation, really, from previous years. A lot of people changed to tubeless, but the thinking was in the past that couldn't be supported, and you would be better off if you just had a massive number of inner tubes.
So how many flats did you have then?
All my flats came in the early part and in the desert where the tires would disintegrate and you get these fine little wires along the road. And my first flat I had, I couldn't even find anything in it. And finally, some experienced people found just this tiny little wire that was in there. In fact, I changed the tire. I got back the first flat. I changed the tire. I thought it was fine. I got on, and 5 minutes later, I had another flat because I wasn't looking for that tiny little wire.
And then most of the surfaces you rode on were what?
It was probably 70-30. Most of it was tarmac of some sort, and then gravel. And you know what, I meant to mention this. We rode on a lot of roads Chinese were building. And we rode on Chinese roads full of Japanese cars. But as we got down south, in Namibia especially, it was mostly all gravel roads.
You had 4 bottles on your bike? That lasts me 45 miles.
Well, you would have opportunities to fill up in between, but yeah, I had set up so I could have 4. I never really had 4 full, and you know, as you go through, it's just kind of like a trail. You're losing stuff falling off. You know, I lost my tire pump on some of the rumble strips, but.
So was it more difficult than your first RAGBRAIS without any training?
Well, it's kind of funny. You train for RAGBRAIS and then use RAGBRAIS to train for this. You know, it wasn't hard. I mean, it wasn't. You know, I got sick, and there was one day that I was the last one in. It must have taken me an hour to go the last 7 or 8 miles because the road was sandy and bad and so forth. And I think 2 or 3 times I took rides in the dog, what we call the dog box, for half a day or whatever. And then one day when I was sick, I didn't know if I was having diverticulitis or kidney stones or what, but and everybody pretty much had that. Or some form of that. That 19-year-old that I showed you, one night I was camped and I was right next to him, and like about 2, 3 in the morning, you know, I hear you know, right outside my tent, and I'm looking to come in. But 6:30 in the morning, man, he's up there on that bike and he's going again.
So how long was it before you got back on a bicycle? How big of a break did you take?
Well, I've got 3 bikes, and my African bike is still in the box. But I've been halfway through. I developed some pretty severe hip problems, and I could ride the bike. It was hip and leg. I could ride the bike. That wasn't a problem, but getting off and walking was a problem. And that took some of the joy out of the end of the trip. There's no question about that. But it did, and a smarter guy probably would have said, let's finish it next year, you know? But I wasn't sure I would have it next year, so.
Was it the bike riding that hurt your hip or what?
Well, yeah, you know, repetitive injury. No, falling. No, I didn't get hurt falling at all. No.
Yeah, just kind of repetitive.
Yeah, just a repetitive injury that old people get.
So when there's an elephant beside you on the road and you stop to take a picture, is there not a little bit of a fear factor in that?
Oh, man. They gave us every day, they gave us lectures about that and how to identify the elephant and it's getting angry or whatever and telling you not to stop and how far away you have to be and so forth. But sometimes you just got to do it.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to out pedal one.
Yeah, you know, you're not. You're not. Yeah. But nobody had any problems.
I have a question about Egypt,
Yeah.
because I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, we took a trip to Egypt, and one of the things we did was to ride across the desert from Luxor to the Red Sea.
Mhm.
And it's that area that you went through that it's just nothing.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm sure it
and
was the same
they
road. I think
loaded
it's-
us onto several buses and had a police escort.
Right.
Because otherwise there was sometimes bandits would kidnap tourists.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, did you have police escorts?
We did in Egypt.
Okay,
It didn't seem necessary, but we did in Egypt. That was the only country we had that type of escort. In Sudan, we had a guy riding along with us also, but he was mainly just, I mean, he was like one guy, but he was more like a facilitator than a protector. But yes, we had police escort in Egypt.
There was one picture, it looked like Share the Road was a little crowded.
Yeah, with those in Sudan,
Hmm.
I'm telling you, and they had these caravans, and there'd be 12, 15 loaded trucks of cattle or these buses. And the buses, that was their road, man. You were, you know, in their way. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that didn't look very pleasant. Like going from here to Maryville on 71. That would not be pleasant either. No.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Oh, I can't.